While we're still waiting a little bit for some people to show up, I want to go over something I did not have a chance to go over on yesterday. Our critique sheet. One of the most important things you can do to get a good grade in a class is to know how your professor is going to grade you. Now, some people use a rubric or a matrix to do it. I prefer the critique sheet because it gives more information about what I'm expecting. The typical rubric doesn't go in nearly as much detail as I go into. But I'd say that most students don't read the critique sheet. There's evidence of that by the fact that the easiest of the critique sheets is probably the most familiar to you is the presentation critique sheet. And a lot of students who are presenting are forgetting to hand me a handout that is called for by the critique sheet, the presentation critique sheet, or sending me the electronic version ahead of time. They're forgetting that. They're forgetting to put questions into it to review at the end of their PowerPoint. So even in that relatively easy critique sheet, they're not doing it. And now they have most of you have seen the news critique sheet, but it has some changes in it, particularly for this class. And you have not seen this critique sheet at all because it's new to this course. You're going to have, as I mentioned the other day in class, 67% of your course grade is going to come from your design and your work within the environment of desktop publishing. Headline writing, editing within that environment, as well as your design of the pages, your photo cropping, all that sort of stuff is going to be done within the environment of desktop publishing. And so I kind of put all that into one critique sheet. Like I say, we'll be starting off with the broadsheet newspaper project will be our first one, then tabloid, then magazine, and then our final exam will be a tabloid. And that will be done under deadline pressure of a 2-hour final exam. So it's important that you go through this critique sheet. If you don't go through any of the others, this one is critical that you go through this critique sheet to understand what I'm expecting. And if you don't understand something, you need to ask me. Even though this goes into a lot of detail, it may not be enough detail for you to fully comprehend, and so you have to ask questions. And I will take whatever length of time I have to in class to explain what I mean with these different criteria. I'm just going to go, like I said, just taking a few minutes while people are still getting here. Go through the first part, the basic design appearance of a newspaper, for example. Particularly this one does relate mostly to newspaper. In the past, I haven't done a lot of magazine design as part of this class here or in Kazakhstan or in America. I've usually stayed with newspapers. And so this critique sheet can be a little bit ignored when we get to magazines, and I will explain at that time. That'll be our last major project, what parts of this critique sheet you can ignore with magazines. But for now, since we're doing newspapers first, it's important that you understand this. So, for example, I did talk yesterday about the importance of having dominant graphics and dominant headlines towards the top. That does not necessarily mean at the very top. As I mentioned yesterday, there was a case where I showed you in the sports page that we were reviewing with 7 different layouts of it, that the one that they considered the best had the major story at the top. So yes, the biggest headline was at the top, but it had no graphics with it. And so the center of focus came down a little bit lower because that graphic went with a different story. And as there are layouts where at the top you have a little bit smaller headline, like maybe you might have a 36-point headline at the top, and then underneath it you have your major story has a 48-point headline. but your design, it may be that the 36 point, the story with the 36 point headline has a good piece of art. And so you're going to design it in such a way as to get your art at the top, but your main story is really underneath it. So there's different ways that you can design a page to try to give emphasis to the major story and yet still use your main art if it's not, if it doesn't come with your major story. So get your graphics and headlines towards the top. Number two is just the opposite. Don't let your layout be bottom heavy. I pointed out that some of those 7 designs of that sports page were, to me, the very worst were those that had the bottom heavy layout, where the major art was at the very bottom of that page. I've talked about things being modular, and I will try to go into more detail later with this, but modular just means rectangular. And so every story in the newspaper, for most newspapers in America now, are rectangular. They may be rectangular and long and deep, or they may be very wide, or they might be square, but they're rectangular in some way. I've mentioned there is an exception, I guess you could say, in that if you have 2 stories that are related to each other, then you package them, and the package is in a rectangle. So the individual stories within that package may not be in a rectangular layout, because you might have one major headline across the top, you may have a piece of art in the middle that goes to both of them, and a story coming down the first column and the last column, and then you can't go backwards, so your first column has to stop. Your story in the first column has to stop, but your story, in the last column, whereas your story in the first column could wrap underneath the photo. So taken by itself, that story is not going to be rectangular, but the entire package will be rectangular with the 2 stories on the one subject. And I'll show you some examples of that. One of the main things is don't ever confuse the reader. Whatever you do, think of the reader and don't confuse the reader. The reader should not have to guess where your story went to. Where I've seen some students have done atrocious things, they're laughable actually, where they have a story come down the far right column, and then they go underneath a photo and they jump all the way to the left column. No, you can't do that. There's no way somebody's going to easily jump from column 6 to column 1, or column 4 to column 1. They're not going to do that. And so you can't jump backwards, so to speak, to the left. So don't confuse your reader. Keep your story under the headline. It occurred to me that some of you might not have really understood what I meant by that, so let me clarify that I'm talking about physically underneath the headline. So if you have a story that's 6 columns wide in a broadsheet, your headline should be 6 columns wide above it, so that the entire story is underneath it. And so the exceptions to that were the side saddle sort of headline to the left, and I've mentioned I wanted that entire thing then boxed. The whole story should be boxed, so there's no confusion, because if you can imagine, here you have a story, let's just talk about the top part of the story, the page, for example. You have a headline going across all the way across the top, then you have under it a story that's going all 6 columns, say in a broadsheet, and underneath that you have a side saddle story, a story with a side saddle headline. Well, now your side saddle headline is taking up maybe a 1 column or a column and a half in the left, but meanwhile you have the columns to the news story at the top are coming down, and they're getting very close to the columns of the story under it. And so it would not be hard for a person to think, I don't know what this gap is here, but they're trying to jump from the bottom of the column to the top story down into the column that really goes with the second story. But you don't have a headline over it. And so you have your headline on a side saddle off to the left, and they're trying to jump down into that next story and thinking it's one story. So that's why you have to box that side saddle story. so that you don't have readers trying, again, back to the main rule, don't confuse your readers. You don't have readers trying to jump from a column of text with story 1 and trying to jump into that's right below it, the right underneath it, story 2 with no headline over it. And so you've got to box it so that they don't try to jump into that next story, thinking it's the same story. Then balance your graphics. This is not a perfect balance, and it kind of goes more with the create dynamic flow. It just means you need to have art in all the quadrants. That's in that kind of balance. So you're not going to balance. You purposely are not going to balance it in the sense that you're going to have a major piece of art. And so, in fact, in some stories, there may not even be you may not even try to get a golden triangle because your art is so big. You decide to make your main piece of art so big that it's dominating the page. You don't need any other art, or maybe very small art, mugshots and stuff. So, the balance typically means, as I was talking about with a dynamic flow, you have some art to the left, you have some light art to the right, you have some art to the left. You're just trying to have some art in all parts of the quadrants. That's the general rule. As I said, there are some exceptions to that when you have a very big piece of art. But even then, that if you're having a very big piece of art, it's probably centered and going straight down the center somehow. So even then, it is, in a sense, in all 4 quadrants, and it's just so big that it's a piece of it is in all 4 quadrants. So number 8 then, I'll be looking for things like if you have stuff too tight, too close together. Like, for example, you put that box around that story that has a side saddle headline. Well, if your box gets too close to the text, like particularly if it's touching the text, well, that's a big no-no, and I'll be deducting from that. If your headline above a story is touching the text, either side of it, touching the text below it or the text above it, the headline should not be touching the text of the story. So you need to be careful to leave a little bit of air between all elements of the story. But for some reason, students make major mistakes like this and do stuff that I would think they would see obviously they should not be doing. Maybe they're in too big a hurry, maybe they're lazy, whatever it is, they're not seeing that this does not look good. So don't have elements of the page touching each other, or anywhere close to touching each other, because then I'm going to say that's too tight, and I'm going to be deducting. I talked about yesterday at least one of the layouts in that sports story was too gray. I mentioned, so they left too much story in the center with the art above and art below, but they had 2 stories depth, covering about a third of the whole page with just text, and that's being too gray. So that's what we refer to as being too gray. And so you have to break up the gray. So you move your art around, you add some extra small pieces of art if you have to, whatever you have to do to keep an area, an entire page, or a piece of the page too gray. You want to break that up. I mentioned as part of the headline not to leave white space without a purpose, and that's true for the entire page too. I've seen some students leave big caps of white just because they ran out of a story or something. They didn't size their picture right. They didn't figure out how to make it take up all the space, and so they just left a big block of white there for no reason. Well, you can't do that. You got to figure out how to fill the space. So that's where I was talking about maybe using a pull-out quote or something to fill some extra space so you can get the text to come down and fill out the space that you have in your page. So make sure that the white space is purposeful or fill it. And then finally, we talked about tombstoning, having 2 stories next to each other with the headlines right next to each other. The worst tombstone is to have 2 stories next to each other where the headlines are the same size and you have the same number of lines. That's the very, 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 very worst scenario of tombstone. And so you have, in one column, for example, you have a or say you have two stories next to each other, they're each in a tabloid format, 2 columns wide, and you have one that's 36 point, and right next to it another one that's 36 point, and you have, even if you have a different number of lines, but especially if you have 2 or 3 lines, each of them have 2 or 3 lines of a headline, and they're right next to each other, then that can be confusing and definitely ugly. It's confusing and ugly. And so you need to make sure that you, again, the general rule that I believe in, that our design editor at the daily paper I was at insisted on, was that if you have 2 stories next to each other, headlines next to each other, you're going to box one of those headlines, box one of those stories. If people did that, then they wouldn't be putting lines over the place like they're doing with some of the modern newspapers. Some of the current newspapers are putting lines all over the place to make sure that people aren't confused. But all they have to do, if they went by the rule that you box, if you had 2 stories next to each other, you boxed one of them, and otherwise headlines went over the story, if they kept those 2 rules, they would not need all the extra lines that they're putting into papers. And it'll look much cleaner and much better. So I don't know why designers now are screwing it up so bad, but a lot of them are in my evaluation. Okay, well, I'm going to stop there, but it's important for you to go through this design critique sheet. Very important. Again, it's worth 67% of your overall course grade to do a good job on the 3 major projects relating to design and on your final exam, which is mostly a design. Again, it's not just design. I may call it design, but part of your responsibility will be writing headlines. Part of your responsibility will be making sure there's no gross errors in editing. Part of your responsibility will be the design and making the whole page look good. Part of your responsibility will be cropping photos and sizing photos correctly and so forth. So there's lots of elements that you'll be responsible for, all covered in this critique sheet, by the way, that you'll be responsible for. And I'll be using this critique sheet to grade all of your design projects, because they are more than design, as the critique sheet reviews. So you have, the top part is about design. Part 2 is about graphics, so that's like cropping your photos and stuff like that. The third part is headlining, and so that's a very major part of your grade, is how do you do your headlines. The fourth part is text, how do you handle your text, and the last part is editing. So I don't put a lot of, editing's only 10% of the overall grade for any project, but it is still part of it, and in some cases I may give you specific instructions that it's going to be worth more than that. Or maybe I will say, okay, in the first 5 paragraphs of every story you have, or of the stories I'm giving you for the final exam, there are mistakes in the first 5 paragraphs I expect you to catch. So for example, that might be what your final exam might include as far as the editing part, that I'll purposely put in some mistakes and have you have to find and correct those mistakes at the top part of some of the stories or all the stories on your final exam. So I'm actually not going to be doing that probably in your major projects, because you're each going to have a different story. And so I do expect you to do a good job with your editing for your pages, but all of you are going to have different stories. So some of you are going to have a harder job than others. Some of you are going to have inherent stories that are not very well written. And as editor of that page, you're expected to correct those stories. So in a sense, that's not fair, but I'm going to try to do it, make sure that everybody over the course of, or over the 3 projects one person doesn't get stuck with all the bad stories, for example. So you'll have a chance to use different stories. Sometimes your stories will be harder to edit, sometimes they'll be easier. But in the major projects, you will be expected to edit the stories that you use on your pages. Okay, so I'll stop there with 3.
So hello everyone, my name is Ko Seng Jen. So today I will talk about news editing. So before I start talk about news editing, I'll briefly talk about the catalog of this topic. So as we can see, there's three main things here. One is the principle of editing your own copy or someone else, and editing procedures, and finally is keeping out of the legal problems. So, okay, every journalist needs to be an editor. Like, as a journalist, after you finish your news story, you get a news story, you have to know at least some editing skills. So, yeah, you better be a editor. So, yeah, just like I say, you have to at least understand some simple editing skill, and everything is never perfect and certainly not what we have produced in the first draft. So you have to edit and then you can publish your new story. So as a professional editor, you will not just changing misspellings, poor grammar, or bad punctuation. Also allow you and expected you to rewrite the entire paragraph, like making more interesting or appealing, telling the truth of the new story. So first, let me talk about the principles. So you have to read a copy of your news story objectively, as distantly as possible, behave of buyer's personal opinion, and also avoid some content error, like make your publication embarrassment of legal problems. Look, when you're editing an news story, you have to look for some unanswered questions, informational gaps, and contradictions. Like it is provocative that you can find more what you're going to point out on the news story. So don't presume your readers like they know some specialized terminology like jargon, because normally many readers they are not very good at English of reading. So many news story have been written on the topic. You cannot just think that, oh, my reader must know what I'm writing in this news story. So actually you can watch for some unjustified use of descriptors like best of most, even some subjective adjectives such as pretty of wonderful. Don't use this kind of word, because this is like you're telling that that's the good thing. So instead of using that, use some feature, precious, verifiable details and description. Yeah, just make it simple and normal. For example, check your another thing you have to do after you get your news story. You have to check verifiable information such as names and address. Like for example, last time there's some journalists from the start. They came to our campus to give us a speech. So they interviewed me. Then I have to see, oh, they wrote my name correctly without any error. Yeah, it's fine for a reader like me. So okay, when you edit your news story, just like the four principles, you have to make sure that on the lead, emphasize the warming of the story, and be concise, like no more than 35 words, and summarize it and represent the rest of the story contents, truly leads into the rest of the story. Just like our professors say that before. And transition is one of the very important things. You have to make sure it flows smoothly, like from the lead into the story, from in the body of the story, like this paragraph to another paragraph, all of it. Okay, straightforward, brevity and simplicity. Moreover, Stylebook is one of the book in America that all the journalists they are using this. So you can use this to avoid some apparent conflicts in style. You should use it also how to say, get a standard for you to write some new story by using some vocabulary. So there's some important style rules of AP style book, like day and days, approximation, timeliness, names, titles, abbreviation, capitalization, punctuation, pronouns, and figures. So first, I want to talk about day and days. It's very important, like an event is more than 6 days before or after the day of the publication, use the day only. For example, the council will discuss the budget at Tuesday meeting. Don't write it like today or tomorrow or something. It might let the reader get confused. Okay? And another example is, don't say the setting is set for Monday or Tuesday. Just simply write down the days. And approximation and timeliness. Always emphasize the most local and most timely angles possible. Yeah, just like what I say just now, don't use a yesterday angle if there's a good day angle available. Like, don't use past tense, always use present tense to tell the story. Here's another thing, names and titles. For both men and women, use first and last name, I mean the surname, in first reference without any courtesy title, like George Jonas or Jean Jonas. A second reference for both men and women, typically use only last name, surname, Jonas. Because if you don't use that, like, people don't know they are Mr. or Mrs., Miss. Some, if you say it wrongly, like, they will be, become upset. Yeah, like you say they are Mrs. of Miss, you know what I mean. And under the AP style, you do use a courtesy title if you needed to distinguish between a man and wife referring to in the same story. Like Mr. Jonas died in the crash, but Mrs. Jonas survived. So you can clearly see there, like, oh, she's the wife of the Mr. Jonas. So give exact titles. Don't make the mistake of presuming the president or prime minister and chairman are synonymous. For example, Dr. Sri Najib Tun Razak, the former prime minister of Malaysia, you have to spell it all Dr. Sri. You cannot just say Najib. I mean, don't simply just tell his name. Another example is Datuk Lee Chong Wei, because as a journalist in Malaysia, you have to know their position and who they are. Like, we have king here, so you have to get a full name. Another example is Chinese President Xi Jinping. You cannot just simply say, oh, Xi Jinping, like he's your friend or someone. For example, I took an example from the Star. So we can see here, they just put Datuk Sri Najib Duran Razak, though it's very long. So next thing I'll talk about is abbreviations. Spell the name out of the first reference, then use the abbreviation of shortened version of the name thereafter. Like, most of us widely recognize that the organization full name, such as FBI, CIA, YMCA, something like this. So if you guys know Dr. Mahathir, we always put his name in the short form Dr. M in Malaysia newspaper. Yeah, if he is widely recognized, you can put it like there. So abbreviate months with more than 4 letters when used in a specific day, like September 24, 1982. Spell out the name of the month when used alone with the year only. It's September 2008. Here's another thing, capitalization. Capitalize former names of religions, political, and public or private organizations. Capitalize former names of ethnic groups and nationalities. capitalize names and nicknames, capitalize the names of specific public bodies. And punctuations, it means commas or full stop, and then you always go inside a quotation marks, like actually depending on the circumstances. Like, have you seen Rocky X? But what I can give you, she asks. So you have to put the punctuation rightly, like there. And avoid superfluous use of comma, but don't violate standard rules. For example, you need to omit the end of something like that, because in journalism we don't put too much, we don't put too many and of this kind of word. So you can just simply omit it without using the comma, okay, and then make it smooth. Pronounce, make sure the antecedent of every pronoun is clear. Antecedent is the word, face of close to which a pronoun refers. For example, I say American President Trump give a chocolate to former President Obama, and then he get a car to him. So what is the he of him you are referred to? Is it Obama or Trump? You have to tell clearly to your reader. So figures here is generally speak out the number from 1 through 9 using digits of all numbers 10 and above. 1, 9, 16, like after 10 you just need to write out the number. Like, don't spell the number with fractions, decimals, monetary signs, not sports scores of time of day. Okay, for example, you don't just say 1 up to 1.5, 1 ringgit, $1, 1 to 0, 1 p.m. Don't write it like that. So last thing is keeping out of legal problems. It's ensure that journalists understand the law, at least it applies to their profession. For the first picture we can see, this Malay newspaper is called Utusan Malaysia. They're writing something like, what more Chinese want? Actually, it makes more conflicts between Chinese ethnic group with Malay. So it's better don't write something like that. And the second thing is, before you verify some of the news, don't tell it like without any proof. So we can see Taiwan, the newspaper, they report MH370 mysteriously resurfaced almost 2 years, vanish of over China Sea. It's like the survivor now they are coming back again, so they found the body, and then everyone is like, what? So yeah, don't do it like this. And I think it's all. Thank you very much.
Hello everyone, my name is Shixi, and today I will talk about the AP Stylebook. So what is AP Stylebook? AP Stylebook refers to the Associated Press Stylebook and Briefing on Media Law. It's an English grammar style and usage guide created by American journalists to standardize mass communication. And the Stylebook offers a basic reference to spelling, grammar, punctuation, and so on. And it's usually used in writing in broadcasting, magazine publishing, marketing departments, and public. First, I will introduce how to write numbers. We should spell out the whole number below 10 and the numerals that start a sentence. For example, 32 children died in the accident. We should spell out 32 and use a hyphen to connect. And we should use figures for 10 and above, and all age and percentage and the time. Place. When we write address, abbreviate words like street, avenue, and past directions only after number. For example, in 50 South Corner Street, the South and street are abbreviations. But if there's no 50, we should spell out the. And when writing states, we should spell out Alaska and Hawaii and the states with 5 or fewer letters, and spell out names of states unless preceded by a city, country, or military base name. And for second references, abbreviate all state names. Usually, always use numerals without st, nd, rd, or th in days. And when writing about events, use months and date, like April 30 and July 5. When referring to a month, date and year, set of year with commas. For example, August 20, 1998, was the day they had all been waiting for. And avoid using yesterday, today, and tomorrow in writing because the story publication could be delayed. Capital. In the title, don't capitalize a, an, and z, or conjunctions or proposition. And in the articles, capitalize formal titles before a name and formal names such as religion, state, special institution, and so on. These are some frequently used punctuations. First, I will introduce comma. Usually use a comma to separate elements in a series. For example, the flag is red, white, and blue. Use a comma to set off a person, the age and hometown. Jones, 32, was arrested. Like this. And use a comma to introduce a complete one-sentence quotation within a paragraph. And use comma to separate an introductory phrase from the main clause. For example, when running, she stopped me. And place a comma before and after the follows. A year if it follows a month and a date, and a state if it follows a city or country name. And in this example sentence, we should put a comma before 1998 and China. Hyphen. To avoid ambiguity or to form a single idea from 2 or 3 words, such as small business owner, and use a hyphen for compound adjectives from before the noun, like part-time job, and don't use when compound modifier occurs after verb. For example, the actor was well known. Don't use hyphen here. Colon. Capitalize first word after colon only if it is a proper noun or start of a complete sentence. Here is an example. And colon should go outside quotation marks. And the last one is period. Don't put space between initials. Graphics. For the graphics in writing, we use only authoritative sources. We don't project, surmise, or estimate in a graphic. We create work only from what we know. And we post or move a locator map only when we can confirm the location ourselves. And we create charts as very proper perspectives to give an accurate representative of date. And the information must be clear and concise. We don't kill or alter date to fit a very need. And we credit our sources on every graphic, including graphics from which AP journalists have created the data set or database. In writing photo caption, the first sentence describes who is in the photograph and what is going on in the present tense, and states when and where the photo was made. The second sentence gives background on the news event or describes why the photo is significant, and don't use descriptive overlines. Quotation. We don't author quotation even to correct grammatic errors or word usage. If a quotation is flawed because of grammar or lack of clarity, the writer must be able to paraphrase in a way that is completely true to the original quote. And if a quote meaning is too murky to be paraphrased accurately, it shouldn't be used. Then briefing on media law. One of the aims of media law is to balance the right of free speech against the protection for the reputation of an individual from unjustified attack. There are many defenses against libel, like fair comment, fair and accurate report, and neural reportage. Invasion of privacy. Publication of private facts or unreasonable revelation of private facts is the most common type, so the journalist should get the consent of private individual involved in advance. And copyright is a federal law that gives creators of media the exclusive rights to copy, distribute, and mash up the things they create for a limited time. As you work on many assignments that include digital media, like image, video, or music, it's good practice to make sure you are abiding by copyright laws. Support guidelines. We should know about the support identification codes when reporting support news and keep the terms accurate. Food guidelines. Similarly, we need to know about the common culinary conversions. For example, 1 tablespoon equals 3 teaspoons. And the AP recipe style requires that break out the recipe in list and instruction information. Use figures for all quantities, and don't use abbreviation, and the title of the recipe should be capitalized. The last one is broadcasting guidelines. Many broadcast stories can be effectively told using such straightforward writing and the simple structure, lead, backup, details, and then background. And the fair story follows principles used by AP's broadcast writers. In lead, use forms of present or future verb tenses. Keep leads short and to the point. Favor the active voice. Attribute at the beginning of sentences. Omit needless words, and prefer the simple to the complex. That's all about it. Thank you very much. So I need to copy the PowerPoint too.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Deng Roland. Now I'm going to give you more guidelines on the punctuation marks. Firstly, the apostrophe. When it's used with nouns, first we add apostrophe when the word ends with s. Add apostrophe and s when the word does not end with s. Second, the remainder is the singular common word ending in s. We add apostrophe and s unless the last word begins with S. For example, the hostess invitation and the hostess seat. Third, the singular nouns ending in S sounds, such as CE, X, and Z, add apostrophe or apostrophe and S. The remainder is we only use apostrophe if the last word begins with S, for example, for conscience sake. Second, when it used with pronouns. First, the contraction of pronouns involve apostrophe like your, is, theirs, whose. Second, other pronouns obey the above rule like another's idea, others' plan. Third, when it's used with descriptive phrases. Please do not add apostrophe to a word ending in S when in a descriptive sense, like a citizen's band radio, a teacher's college. Here the citizens and the teachers are the descriptive word in a descriptive sense. Second, apostrophe and S is required when a term involves a plural word that does not end in S. For example, a children's hospital, a people's republic. Third, when apostrophe used with inanimate objects, we usually use of phrases to describe it, but if in a personalized sense, we can also add apostrophe, like the death call, the wind murmur. But generally, we try to avoid excessive personalization. The next one is brackets and parentheses. The brackets cannot be transmitted over news wires. Therefore, we often put parentheses around words or numbers to indicate that they are additional, separate, or less important than the main parts. Then the next one is colon. The most frequent use of colon is at the end of a sentence to introduce lists, tabulation, text, or to emphasize something. Second, it's also used in the dialogue. Third, it can also be used in time, like 8:30 p.m. First, it's sometimes used in the biblical and legal citations, like Missouri Code 3:245.-260. The next one is dash. First, the dash is used to denote an abrupt change in a thought or an emphatic pause, like we will fly to Paris in June if I get a raise. Second, it's used in a series within a phrase, like he listed the qualities, intelligence, humor, independence that he lacked in an executive. Third, the dash can also be used in attribution, like who steals my purse, steals trash, shakes bell. First, it's used in the datelines, like New York, AP, the city is broke. Fifth, it's used in lists, like John gives the following reasons. He never ordered the package. If he did, it didn't come. If it did, he sent it back. The next one is ellipses. First, it's used to indicate the deletion of one or more words in condensing clause. Second, it's used to indicate a pause or hesitation in speech or a thought, like the following example, President Nixon's resignation announcement. Good evening. In all the decisions I have made in my public life, I have always tried to do what was best for the nation. However, it has become evident to me that I no longer have a strong enough political base in Congress. As long as there was a base, I felt strongly that it was necessary to see the constitutional process through to its conclusion. That to do otherwise would be a dangerously destabilizing precedent for the future. Then we come to the exclamation point. The exclamation point is used to express a higher degree of surprise, incredulity, or other strong emotion. But we need to keep in mind that to avoid overuse of the exclamation point. And do not use a comma or a period after the exclamation mark. For example, how wonderful, he exclaimed. Then the next one is heaven. First, the heaven is used to avoid ambiguity or to form a singular idea from two or more words. For example, he recovered his health, and he recovered the leaky roof. In the first sentence, the recover means cure, and become better from the illness. And in the second sentence, this recovered means to repair the leaky roof. And then a bluish-green dress, a low it or attitude. In these examples, the compound word become an adjective in here, and the social economic. Second, when the large number ends with y and connect another number, then we need to use hyphen between them, like 2155. The next one is question mark. First, it's used at the end of a question, like who started the right, you started the right. Second, in the multiple questions, like did he plan the right, employ assistance, and give the singular to begin. And we can also use the second question mark for the next example, like did he plan the right, employ assistance, give the singular to begin. Use the question mark at the end of each part. The next one is quotation marks. It's often used for quotations, composition titles of books or movies, and the nicknames, the early and familiar terms. Here are the example of the quotations. First, I have no intention of staying, he replied. The second one is Franklin said, a penny saved is a penny earned. A spectacular said the practice is too conservative for inflationary times. The fourth one is in paragraph 1, he said, I'm shocked and horrified by the incident. Paragraph 2, I'm so horrified in fact that I will ask for the death penalty. Or you can also use the following example like, he said he was shocked and horrified by the incident, and I'm so horrified in fact that I will ask for the death penalty, he said. First, when quotation mark used in first, we need to keep in mind that do not use quotation marks to report a few ordinary words that a speaker or writer has used. Like the example, the senator said he would go home to Michigan if he lost the election. It would be better to remove the quotation marks. Second, when it's used in partial quotes. When a partial quote is used, do not put quotation marks around the words that the speaker couldn't have used. Suppose the individual said, I'm horrified at your slovenly manners. This example is wrong. Like, she said she was horrified at their slovenly manners. But the following example is right. Like, she said she was horrified at their slovenly manners. Third, when it's used in quotes within quotes, like she said, I quote from his letter. I agree with Caption that the female of the species is more deadly than the male, but the phenomenon is not an unchangeable law of nature, a remark he did not explain. The last one is semicolon. The semicolon is used to indicate a greater separation of thought and information than a comma less than the period. First, it's used to clarify a series, long items, or when individual segments contain commas. Like the following example, he is survived by a son, John Smith of Chicago. 3 daughters, Jane Smith of Wichita, Kansas, Mary Smith of Denver, and Susan of Boston, and a sister, Martha of Omaha, Net. Second, it's used to link independent clauses, like the package was due last week. It arrived today. Then the final part is exercise. You decide whether the use of the quotation mark is wrong or not, is wrong or correct. The first one is heart, the copper cried. Is correct or wrong? Hello, everyone. Tell me. Wrong. Yeah, it's the first one is wrong. We do not need the comma after the exclamation point. The second one, his attitude suggested that he knew it all. Yeah, it's first because knew it all is an adjective in this sentence, but we need a verb here, so we do not need the dash between the words. And the third one, there are 21 students in class. Yeah, 21. Because 20 is a number, is a big number and with y. So if it connects with another number, we need a dash between it. The first one, he asked what the score was. Please. Yeah, it's true. The last one, a citizen's band radio. Eileen. False. False? No, it's correct because the citizens in here is a descriptive word, so we do not need to add apostrophe after the citizens. Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
I don't know why you guys don't remember this stuff or aren't listening to me. Just real quick on a couple of these last items here. Somebody just asked me the other day about quote. Well, there's two things here I want to cover. One is here's an example of paired quotes. I've told you about this, but I haven't actually shown you an example. So Roland again did show us an example of where you might use paired quotes for emphasis. So instead of a parentheses, in other words. So actually, AP prefers paired dashes is what I meant over parentheses. So in this example here, he listed the qualities: intelligence, humor, independence, that he liked in executive. That's what they prefer over parentheses by AP style. You have the case here where it's used for emphasis. We will fly to Paris in June, dash, if I get a raise. That's for emphasis. This last one, Jones gave the following reasons. He never ordered the package. He did it if he did, it didn't come. If he did, he sent it back as a like a list. I haven't seen that very often. So this one I wouldn't really recommend this one actually. But do remember that it's sometimes used in place of parentheses, as in this case here, and definitely for emphasis. I use it quite a bit for emphasis. The other one, if I can find it real quick. Okay, I'm not sure she gave it enough emphasis, but the question I was asked the other day was, how about if I continue a quote on a second paragraph? And so here's an example of that. So in the first paragraph, he said, "I'm shocked and horrified by the incident," and there's no end quote. And then the second paragraph, however, you do start the next paragraph with a quote mark. "I am so horrified, in fact, that I will ask for the death penalty," and an end quote. So the key here that was asked and that she's answered here, do you need a quotation mark right here at the end of the first paragraph where you're going straight from from part of the quote to another part of the quote? The answer is no, you don't need one there. That's the only place you drop it out. You still have quotation marks at the start of each paragraph, but the one place you can drop it out is at the end of that first paragraph if it's directly going into a continuation of the quote. That said, I never do this. I don't do it because I'm always going to, I like to have, first off, you can have up to 3 sentences in a paragraph. So I certainly wouldn't do it here with only 1 sentence in a paragraph. I'd put them on the same paragraph. But if I had a really long, well, it's hard for me to suggest that you should have more than a 3-sentence direct quote before you go into an indirect quote. So if you can have up to 3 sentences in a paragraph, I would advise against going on with that same direct quote in the second paragraph anyway. But if you did, I would suggest you should have an attribution in both paragraphs anyway. And so I would, if I did have a 3-sentence direct quote in the first paragraph, I would end that paragraph with an attribution. So I use a type 2 attribution, and then start the next one with a direct quote possibly. And and then somewhere in the second paragraph also have an attribution. Now that would end up being up to 6 sentences of a direct quote, and that's very unusual. And so even though I'm somebody who likes direct quotes, I like lots of direct quotes because I think they do humanize, I think they do give credibility and so forth. I never, hardly ever, I can't remember a time, but maybe I have, I hardly ever have more than 3 sentences of direct quote before I go to an indirect quote. And so I avoid that as much as possible, but if I did go to a second paragraph with a direct quote, I would still avoid this punctuation question mark. Because even though it's correct, some people may not think it is. And so I want to avoid that anyway, and I want to have attribution in every paragraph anyway, especially if they're each going to be three sentences long. I definitely want attribution in each paragraph. And so I'm going to use the attribution to break it up from one paragraph to the next paragraph. So I'm going to avoid this, but this is correct, that if you have 2 paragraphs as a direct quote, you can leave the quotation marks off the end of the first one. The other thing I was going to, some of you may have seen that the AP disagrees with me on direct quotes. The rule, they said they made a very strict policy. You do not even correct grammar in a direct quote. If you have bad grammar, then use it as an indirect quote, is what they said. Now, first off, I'd like to explain, this is an organization that the press itself might be critical of if they said something that they found at all controversial. It also is something that thousands of newspapers and organizations are following. It's kind of hard for them to say in an AP style book, you don't have to be exactly right. Okay, that's something AP would find it very hard to say in public. And most journalists will not admit that. Most journalists will not admit that they're not exactly right in their quotations. And yet if they are exactly right, why is it that the journalists at the end of a press conference in the White House get together to agree on what the president said? They're not exactly right. And I know from personal experience, and then there's bosses, editors, according to my surveys, do not want them to know shorthand. If they don't know shorthand, I can guarantee you that unless they're recording it, they're not getting it correct. I am as good a note taker as anybody, and when I check myself against my recording, I'm off. I am not exactly right. I mean, I get maybe some right, but I get some wrong. And it's not unusual to be slightly off, but just a word or two. I'm not saying I'm not very far off in my notes. My notes are good enough that, as I've said before, I've had dozens of people tell me how wonderfully I reported them. And yet I know that I corrected their grammar, and I know I made a few adjustments in their quotes. But my adjustments are such that they do not remember my adjustments. They don't remember that they did not say exactly what I put down if I purposely changed it, or if I found out later, or figured out later that I actually did slightly misquote them by listening to my own recording. So, as a pragmatist, I'm telling you, I have more problems with beginning reporters getting hung up on trying to be perfect than I have people questioning their accuracy. Much more problem with them not using direct quotes because they're not satisfied with the quality of their quotes. It's important to have quotes, and as I said, if it's close enough that your person you're interviewing does not know the difference, you're close enough. That's a pragmatist perspective of it. Somebody who actually has to work on the front lines every day. And whoever wrote the AP style book basically is making the politically correct claim that you shouldn't use a direct quote without being accurate. But the truth is, that's a lie. That is an outright lie. But because they're also at the same time telling them don't use a recorder, at the same time they're telling them don't learn shorthand. And the truth is, nobody takes down quotes exactly right, at least very many of them, because that's just not possible while you're listening, while you're trying to keep up with what they're saying, and you're taking notes at the same time. You're going to be off. I guarantee it. Don't get hung up on that. As long as you have the essence of it and you're close, most of the words are accurate. Most of the words are accurate. Then they're not going to know the difference. And as I said before, I've never had anybody question my accuracy except those with whom I actually was accurate, and they were embarrassed. And so in most cases where I had somebody question my accuracy, I had a tape recording of it, luckily. There may have been some time when I didn't have a recording, but the few times in my decade-long career where people have challenged my accuracy, I've had a tape recorder and proven them wrong. And they've been upset about it, and they've lied about it and so forth, because the main time they question it is when I'm the most accurate, because I've caught them lying, or I've caught them saying something really stupid and they're politicians and they want to lie their way out of it. Other than that, I've never had anybody challenge my accuracy. And my accuracy is the pragmatist version of an accurate quote. I recognize I'm probably off a word here, a word there, but I also know that they're not going to know that I have the essence of it correct, and I may be a word or two off. That's the pragmatist approach, and that's why I have all my reporters work that way, because there's no other way to function well as a reporter. Unless you're going to use a tape recorder and everything, and the same people are saying you have to be exact are saying don't use a recorder. So, it's kind of hypocritical in a way. If you did it, if you were really honest and actually tried to keep what they said, then basically you'd have almost no quotes. Because you wouldn't be using a recorder, and you would be very unsure of your accuracy, and you should be unsure. Like I said, I'm probably one of the few who uses the recorder a lot, and so I know that I'm not perfect because I've checked my note-taking against my recorded. And I'm sure that other people are no more accurate than I am. I'm absolutely sure of it. And again, I've never been challenged except in the cases where people are just trying to lie their way out of the truth. So I would not take what they said there real seriously because it's not pragmatic to do it that way. And it's actually not even truthful to say that because I've tested it and you're not going to be accurate. I know you're not going to be exactly accurate. You're going to be off. And if you get hung up on that, you're not going to be a good reporter. So don't get hung up on that. Don't get hung up on being exactly right. Be as close as you can and make sure that you don't take it out of context, that you don't misrepresent somebody, that you're close, that most of the words are accurate. Be sure that most of the words are accurate. But if you don't remember, did they say this word or that word? I don't remember, but the rest of the sentence you're pretty sure about, that's close enough. Don't get hung up about it. And you will never be challenged unless you're telling the truth, in which case you'll be challenged because they don't want the truth to be known. That's the truth of it. So, okay, the rest of the period, sorry to take too much of your time, but you go ahead and take a look at each other's stories and try to give some suggestions to each other on how they can improve their stories. You are editors, so now you're both copy editors and content editors, and your function the rest of the class. If somebody wants to ask me about something, you can bring up something to me to take a look at. Don't ask me to copy edit your whole story. I'm not going to do that. But if you have a specific question you want me to address, come show it to me and I will give you my response, my feedback. Okay, so go ahead and get together with some other people, share your stories with each other, and help each other out here. So you can get a better grade when you hand it in for real next Monday.